Okay, so hello everyone. I got the feeling when I got this sort of shift, this sort of 3:15 shift, I thought two things. I thought, one, God, they'll have been through a lot already. My goodness me, they'll have already been through an awful lot in terms of kind of stuff broadcast at you. And secondly, I also thought this is going to be the school run shift, isn't it? This is going to be the one where suddenly people, there'll be lots in the chat going, I just have to go and pick up the kids and that kind of thing. I am really curious how you are. So I'm going to invite you to have a look at the icons in the bottom right there, you know, the smiley faces and all that sort of stuff. Have a look in there, and I want you to, thank you very much, Lip. I want you to choose an icon in there that best represents how you're feeling right now. Have a dig into those icons and see what you can find.
Oh my God.
Let's just see some icons. Maria's got sunglasses on. She's somewhere hot and sunny. That's good. What else have we got? Oh, Juju, that looks a little bit overwhelmed. Is that an overwhelmed icon? Yes. Okay, Bill's looking happy. Nikki, that looks a bit like a sleepy one. I'm not sure. Or it could be happy sleepy. Sometimes when you kind of hover above these, they actually tell you what the name of the icon is. Okay, so Krish is celebrating. I like that. Relax, Nikki, I like it. Thank you very much. So generally pretty good. Well done. So well done for making it through. I'm assuming that a lot of you are at this morning's session, and in some senses you've come on the whole journey all the way through. Elspeth, I know you were there this morning, so there's quite a few faces that I recognize. It's great to see you all. I've kind of been thinking about this, not just in terms of the content, but in terms of the way it kind of gets delivered as well. And I really, really, really want this to be participatory. I think that you will have been talked at quite a lot already, and I know we have breakout rooms, but nevertheless, there's quite a bit of talking at you going on. So first of all, welcome, and thank you for making it through to my session. My name's Ken, and I'm one of the supervisors at Animas, and today's theme really came from something that I kind of see out there, and I've always seen in terms of both my own coaching journey and working with other coaches as well, but never really had an opportunity to kind of dig very deeply into and to be curious about. And curiosity is really the theme of this workshop, because I don't really have any kind of amazing right answers for you. I don't have any particular models for you either. I think what I'm looking to do is kind of, you know, get our radars up, just make us kind of more aware of what some of these things might be, because I see them everywhere, and I'm going to be curious to see if you think the same. So my invitation is, first of all, to stay, as was talked about this morning. Please stay for the entire workshop. I'm assuming that if you were going to do the school run, you probably would have gone by now. So please stay for the whole workshop. I'm sure you will get something from it. Please be open and honest, and please share, because there's quite a lot built into this in terms of feedback and discussion in the group environment. And if I say who's got some thoughts and reflections and no hands go up, we're going to be a little bit stuck, and I am very good at holding the space for a long time until somebody does. So the invitation is to share as much as possible, and I know that's what you get from these kinds of sessions anyway. It's much better hearing from other people as well as someone like myself. So I do, having said all that, I do have some slides to kick us off, but that's really, as usual, to kind of get some stimulated thoughts going. And these are just my thoughts. They're not really anyone else's. They're not from an academic theory. They're not from someone as worldly wise and experienced as Mr. Nick Bolton. These have all come from within me, and I'm just curious about what you think. And it's as simple as that. So I am going to share some slides to get us going. Just have a little pause while I get my presentation up. Let me just hear, preferably here, if everybody can see these once they kick in. thinking about it. Can you all see that?
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Thank you very much. Right. So when I first came up with the title for this, it's really interesting because it said something like Paradox and Contradiction. Can't remember what the rest of the title was, but Nick changed it. Nick Bolton changed it, and he changed it to Playing with Paradox and Contradiction based on what I'd written in the précis. And I rather like that. I kind of like playing. I like that idea of playing, and I think it's something that we can do a lot in coaching, and I think it's something that we can do a lot with theories of coaching and talking about coaching. So it is in the spirit of playing with this that I come to you this afternoon. So please feel free to play with whatever you hear today, because I think something a bit more lighter and a bit more humorous and everything else this afternoon is going to help us get through what's been and what is a very long day. But I did want to also start with some definitions, because I don't know about you, but I kind of thought I knew about paradox and contradiction. What was the exact kind of definition of both those things? Are they the same? Are they different? I wasn't entirely sure. So I went and had a look at some dictionary definitions and found three. Something that seems absurd or contradictory, which could be in brackets or in quote marks true, because we all know that there's a bit of an issue with that word. What is true? But anyway, the sense that there might be something absurd or something contradictory about something that feels right, effectively. Another definition was something reasonable sounding, which leads to a conclusion that is logically unacceptable or self-contradictory. So something that just feels kind of, right but wrong, which is a paradox in itself. And the third one that I thought was probably the easiest and simplest one, a person or thing that combines contradictory features or qualities. A person or thing that combines contradictory features or qualities. But what I thought for the purposes of today was to have a look at some things that are actually, these are officially paradoxes. And some of these will be familiar to you. Less is more is a pretty obvious one. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. The beginning of the end, we hear that a lot, is a paradoxical statement, as is earning money by spending it. So a true pure paradox is something like this, where the contradiction is actually contained within the statement itself. Less is more is probably the most famous, true and pure paradoxical statement. But I thought for today, rather than getting into the semantics of all of that, today, for me, it's a discussion about anything that feels like a contradiction, anything that feels contradictory. So if we just put to one side, what's a paradox, what's a contradiction, and if we just agree to kind of look at anything that feels like it's a contradiction, then that might take the weight off some of that other stuff and allow us to kind of explore something together without worrying too much about accuracy. So what I'm hoping will be some of the takeaways from today. Really, it's quite simple to kind of recognize paradox and contradiction, to be aware of it, and to be comfortable with it as well. To stimulate your own inquiry, as mine has been, into putting this workshop together, really interesting and fascinating about where you can see it, where it shows up, and how it shows up. And finally, I guess, within our sessions, maybe to think about naming it or asking about it a little bit more once our awareness is there. And of course, to do that with curiosity and without attachment, but nevertheless to think about how can we bring in something that feels paradoxical or contradictory into the conversation, if it's something that we're feeling or something that we are seeing. And I think this applies to ourselves. I think this applies to our clients. And I think this applies to systems. And this has been a big theme of today, hasn't it? Right from the keynote speech, right through some of the workshops I was attending. I think every single discussion today I've had has had something in it about systems. So it feels like this is part of a big discussion that we're kind of entering into a lot more, I think, as coaches and responding to what's going out there within the wider world. So pretty simple stuff, I hope. So if this sparks something and it gives you what I'm calling a curiosity radar for all of this, that you're able to start seeing it, start spotting it, start thinking about it, then hopefully I will have done the job in terms of the workshop. Because I think this stuff is sometimes very hard to pin down, and it's hard to be precise about it. It's hard to be accurate about it, and it's hard to be conclusive about it, I guess. But if we have a radar for this, or our paradox and contradiction radar is heightened, then that's going to give us some of the content and some of the stimulation and curiosity about working with our clients. So just a brief look at how this is going to run time-wise, in case you have something important to do and would like to know what's going to happen within this workshop. So we've had the welcome and invitations. We are currently looking at the definitions and takeaways. The next thing is going to be just a little bit from me about where this might show up, just to stimulate some examples, some ideas, some thoughts, some reflections. And then we're going to go into a breakout room for 10 minutes in pairs, just to see how that resonates with you, what comes up for you, where have you seen it? What are you now thinking about, something you weren't thinking about before that might feel contradictory? And then we'll have feedback and discussion from that within this group, and there's about 15 minutes for that. So I really love hearing back from people. I really love sharing what people's thoughts were, and I know that's a really enjoyable thing for people coming to workshops as well. So I've put quite a lot of time in for that feedback and discussion to happen. And then we'll shift to another breakout room to having a look at, okay, so now we've kind of recognized this a bit more, and we've thought of some examples. We've thought for ourselves and our clients and the systems that we work in where paradox and contradiction may show up. How do we embrace it? How do we welcome that? How do we use it for data? How do we use it in our conversations? And again, you'll have 10 minutes to kind of think about that, and then we'll come back and discuss that. And if there's time, we'll have some takeaways. I am conscious that I need to get you away by 4:40 in time for Yannick's main stage presentation about 10 minutes later. So there is an aim to give you another break, I think, between 4:40 and 4:50. So that's the agenda for today. So the first part of that, or the next part of that on that timeline, is where might this show up? And like I keep stressing, this is just stuff I've been thinking about. And then as I've been thinking about it, it's been showing up. So I thought I'd share a couple of things that have happened to me recently. And this is purely whilst I've been thinking about this workshop. So I went to see a client in, which park was it? Regent's Park. I went to see a client in Regent's Park. And the first thing we did was, before we went into the park, we kind of contracted on what the outcome was going to be for the session. And then we did a walking coaching session. And then before we left the park, we talked about, the takeaways and what had happened within the session and what the learnings were. So it was a lovely kind of physical representation of a beginning, middle, and an end in a coaching session. But as I went into the park, there was some public art going on. Stuff in one corner of the park that had been set up, I don't know for how long, but different artists with different pieces of art within the park. And the first one that I saw was this one, which I thought was a beautiful illustration of something paradoxical. And I thought, well, there it is, right in front of me. I was thinking about it, and there it is. It's shown up as something paradoxical. And then it also occurred to me, of course, paradox and contradiction for artists, for creative people, for musicians, for all sorts of people. I was thinking paradox and contradiction is something that appears all the time, especially in the artistic world, something that just kind of puts two things together and makes us think about them in a different way, potentially, or makes us see something absurd as something that might actually be logical. So that was one thing that struck me. Well, first of all, oh my goodness, it really is everywhere. And secondly, yeah, you see it a lot in the creative world, this idea of paradox. So if artists and creative people are recognizing it, how do we do the same? So that was last week. And then this Monday, I was going into the West End to go and see someone for a coffee. This is entirely true. I'm not making this up. And on the train, when I sat down on the train between Waterloo East and London Bridge, I noticed there was a guy sat opposite me. And I slightly sneakily took a photograph of this guy. And I guess we can never make assumptions. But my first look at him was, okay, here's someone maybe from the city, maybe banker, maybe going to his club, I don't know, up in the West End. He's reading about Queen's funeral. He, I don't know, typically looks like what you might kind of think of someone from the establishment, if you were to sort of be stereotypical about it. There he is. And then I noticed something else. Well, in fact, this guy, I don't know if you can see his shoes. I hope I'm not blocking his shoes, but you can probably see one of his shoes at least. And you could also see, I've highlighted it there, you can also see the sign that says, please do not put your feet on the seats. So there he is, this sort of archetypal figure with his feet on the seats and these loafer shoes that just struck me as doesn't really quite go with the rest of the look. So what's the point? The point is, I think, that there is something hugely paradoxical in this. And there is something in me that's then saying, wow, what's this guy thinking? What's he saying? Or what is he wanting to say? And there's a bit of a rebel in there, isn't there? There's a kind of the rebel of the shoes versus the suit. There's the rebel of putting his feet up when there's a sign right next to him saying, please don't put your feet on the seats. So, this is full of contradiction for me. And this is full of possible insights or possible things that go deeper and a little bit further than we might imagine when we first look at someone and what might be going on. So he was a great example, I think, of where we can see contradictions and we can be curious about them. We can just start to see things that think, well, there's something else going on there, isn't it? Just by the way this is presented as a scenario. So this is part of my observation, I guess, that when we start to kind of think about this, we can see it everywhere and we can see it in lots of different places. I think that's the end of the slides. I've still got some more to do in terms of talking to you, so I will continue doing that for the moment. But let me just check in first of all, actually. Let's just stop, because does anything come up for you in terms of that scenario, that man on the train? Does what I'm saying make sense? Christos, was that a hand up to say something, or just yes, it does?
Yeah, thank you, Ken. I think it's very interesting, and the thoughts that your presentation so far triggered is that it's interesting because paradoxes can be clear, can be objective, but can also be subjective in the way we read them. And I'm saying this because my thought, and I understand that I'm gonna be judgmental for a person that I don't even know who had his photo taken, and I might be totally wrong and very very unfair to this person. But another thought I had was, well, if this is a kind of a person who represents the establishment, maybe this act of putting the shoes on the seat is not rebellious, but it might be a total sense of entitlement
100%.
in terms of following the rules,
Yeah.
or not following the rules without any consequences.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how paradoxes can be read differently as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that could be a whole privilege thing. Oh, those rules are for other people, they don't apply to me. Yeah, Gabriel's just put it, that doesn't apply to me. Could be an equal interpretation. That's why I love it, because it's just like there's so much going on in there. Libby, jump in.
Yeah, God, there's so much in it, Ken. I mean, the first thing is that when I see somebody that doesn't fit my initial idea of them, I'm kind of, it's like a smile in the mind. It's like, don't go putting people in boxes, because we are so much more than how we might just initially appear. That's the first thing. And yes, I'm always kind of like, I like it when someone defies my expectations, when they present a contradiction. And then the other thing is around paradox, which Tom and I have already had a little riff about, in the chat. But from my experience, having kind of initially trained in sort of, I guess, continental philosophy and then Buddhism, and, always looking at sort of the lenses that we look at things through and the paradigms, what occurs to me is that actually paradox is much more prevalent. It's the norm actually for me, rather than the aberration. Yeah. And I think this idea of everything being this or that dualistic way of seeing the world is leading us to a very difficult place where we think we're separate from each other and the world. And my experiences and what a lot of clients pick up on is this idea of this and that, rather than this or that, represented by the yin and yang symbol. And that's not to say, Tom, that we don't need a bit of that, good Cartesian, logico-positive, right, wrong, black, white, good, bad stuff. It's just that generally things for me are this and that, rather than this or that. Yeah.
Love it. Thank you, Libby. And there'll probably be a few other things that might chime with you as well that I've got to say here, but let me move on just to say, because just to stimulate this a bit further, I used that one because it was really topical, and it was literally that just happened to me. And it's a classic thing of, when you're thinking about buying a red car, all you can see is red cars. When I was thinking about paradox and contradiction, all I could see was paradox and contradiction everywhere. But I wanted to just share a few more thoughts just to kind of see if this stimulates the discussion that you'll be having shortly. And I've broken this down into sort of, us as coaches, our clients, and within systems, as we've just been hinting at. So some of the coaches stuff, where does contradiction show up for coaches? One of the most common, I guess, that's now become a bit of a theme is that we heard it again this morning. We coach best when we stop being a coach, and that to me is hugely paradoxical and contradictory. And I understand what it means. It means that we stop, playing a role, or we stop gamifying what's going on. But it's inherently a contradiction that we're better coaches when we stop trying to be coaches. So that was one. The whole thing, and this has come up time and again in working with Anima students, this thing about interrupting the client. Interrupt the client. No, don't interrupt the client, but also interrupt the client. So, understanding and getting to where that is, appropriate, and how that should be done, it becomes a bit of an art form, but it can be heard as a paradox. It can be really heard as a paradox. And I've talked to people about this. Am I supposed to interrupt them? Am I not supposed to interrupt them? What am I supposed to do? So that sits for me as quite a solid paradox for coaches. I guess one of the other ones is, and these two relate to marketing, because I think it goes, it's not just in the sessions and everything else, it's about marketing for me as well. That, I speak to a lot of people, and I suffered from this as well, is, I want clients, but I don't want to tell people I'm a coach. Because, I still have this identity of being something else. In my case, I was a PR man. So it's going to be hard for me to suddenly start talking about being a coach. So for me, there was a contradiction in thinking I want to be a coach and get clients, but also I'm not telling anybody that I'm a coach. That for me was kind of inherently contradictory. And the other thing in this section is about and you can shoot me down over this if you like, but I think we spend a lot of our time, saying that we're not experts, we're not gurus, we're not there. It's all about clients. And then we jump onto LinkedIn and give everybody our 5 tips, or this is what you should do, and this is my guide to XYZ. And we suddenly turn into experts, and we suddenly turn ourselves into people with authority out there on LinkedIn. And I've been through that journey myself. So again, there's something kind of contradictory for us as coaches in that. For me, for clients, again, a big paradox for clients is that we kind of think that those clients who might benefit most from coaching are actually the ones that don't get a coach, because there is something in their stuckness that won't allow them to go and get a coach. That's a paradox for me. There's paradox, I think, and this is probably one you hear quite often, someone who says they want to change, but they don't change, or they don't take any action, or they don't do anything. That sits for me as a contradiction. We probably all know high achievers, really amazing people who actually aren't that confident once you're going to get them one-to-one. That feels contradictory. So there's lots within our clients that can be paradoxical and contradictory. And then finally, on the systems front, I think for me, I've got kind of two systems in here, and there are many of them. 2 that I think are really interesting. One is the systems in which our clients find themselves, whether that's family, work, or whatever. And work ones might be something like, someone who's got a boss who wants to introduce a well-being policy, but actually has very little emotional intelligence themselves, or is not really kind of bought into it. And quite often people can be struggling with that. Or people who kind of feel that they're living in some kind of corporate hypocrisy quite often, that they joined a company for its values, but those values don't play out within the company as they see it, and that can feel and sit with them as a contradiction. So there's systems like that, organizations, groups, and then if we went even higher up to some of the things that have been talked about today, I was really struck. I don't know if anyone else saw this, but the drought in China, which was largely to do with hydropower and a lack of water coming into hydropower in a lot of Chinese energy companies, was leading. A lack of water was leading to a lack of electricity and a lack of energy. But at the same time, of course, because it was so hot, people were going out and buying air conditioners and fans and all sorts of things, and therefore the problem was being accentuated and it was being made worse. That again sits for me as a contradiction, and I think we're going to face many more of those kinds of contradictions, as Libby was hinting at. And then if we go even further up, this for me is one of the biggest contradictions of all. And I told you I was going to talk personally, so I am. I'm a great big fan of the James Webb Telescope, which many of you will know is out there in space. Thank you, Christos. Pointing towards the origins of the universe and bringing back incredible information and incredible stuff. And so we're learning. This is the time where we are learning the most about our origins, and at the same time we are grappling with what might ultimately be human extinction. So, we have those 2 things playing out at the same time. And again, I find that contradictory. I find that paradoxical, but I also find it something about the world and the systems and everything else that I'm living in. And even the economy this morning, it was just striking me again how putting up interest rates, affects one part of the economy, and tax cuts does another thing to the economy. So, very rarely is all this stuff in isolation, but paradox and contradiction, I think, are showing out through all of this stuff all of the time. And personally, the more we're aware of it, I think, the more we can be curious about it and the more we can bring it into our conversations. I am going to stop at that point because we're going to go into breakout rooms, but I'm going to check first of all, is anyone got anything to say from what I just said or completely disagrees with any of it? Or was I going too fast and I've lost you all behind? Thumbs up from Libby. Anyone in the wrong workshop? All good and resonating. Thank you, Nikki. I appreciate that. That's great. I'm going to let Sarah into the session. I'm going to let Sarah in, and then we'll go into the breakout rooms. Let me just allow her to land. Okay. Hi, Sarah. Sarah Bickers, that's you. Hi. We're just about to go into.
I was already in. I don't know. Don't know what
Oh, that was funny. I thought I'd admitted you into the waiting room. Sorry, into the session. My mistake. Beg your pardon. We are going to go into breakout rooms. So the very simple question that I'm going to ask you to think about is, where are you aware of contradiction and paradox? Where are you aware of contradiction and paradox? And I mean that in you as a coach, in your clients, or the systems that we all operate in. So where are you aware of paradox and contradiction within yourself, perhaps, you as a coach, within your clients, and in the systems that you operate in? And I've put those questions in the chat box as a reminder. So we'll have 10 minutes on this, and you'll be in pairs. So hopefully that will give you enough both time and not too many people to get some great thoughts. And I'll be inviting you to share what comes up for you back into the space when we come back. Is that all clear with everybody? Any questions? All good? Thumbs up? Great. Krish, are you all right to put everyone into rooms?
Yep, we're set up and for 10 minutes. And all right, here you go.
Enjoy. Okay, I'm hoping the fact that you all used as the maximum time was indicating that you were having some great discussions. As I said before, I would love to hear some thoughts, reflections, insights, points that you discussed. Tom, is your clapping? There you are. Excellent.
Yeah, sorry,
Tom,
wrong
Tom,
icon.
That's all right.
Yeah, we just had a really interesting conversation, and we almost sort of positioned it as a continuum or a spectrum of paradoxes. And at one end, you know, there's these little paradoxes that happen all the time, which probably enrich our lives and keep things interesting. And we kind of postulated, what would it be like leading a life where there was no paradox or no contradiction, and it could end up being a very, I don't know, bland, vanilla existence. If not, you know, if everything was always perfectly aligned in one direction and nothing ever contradicted that, it might be very strange. Sure. And then we said, right up the other end of the scale, you might have these sort of monumental contradictions, which you know, potentially have the possibility of doing harm. And the example we used is someone in the judiciary who upholds the law during the week and breaks it on the weekend. You know, being quite problematic, you know. So, and then we kind of thought, you know, so where might we sit on that continuum? Where's a comfortable place to sit? Where would be a slightly more daring place to sit if we wanted to introduce more of it, if we could see that it adds benefit? So yeah, that was just one of the myriad of points that we ended up talking about. It was a great conversation I had.
That's great. That's great. A world without contradiction. Love it. Lip, did I see your hand up and then go down again?
Yeah, okay, I'll put in my 2 cents worth.
You should.
If we become very much more aware of paradoxes, as you are indicating, we can do. Can we get to the point where we get very confused, that it can be very distracting?
Just say a little bit more about that, Lip.
if our mind, not that I say we should do, but we become more and more trying to catch paradoxes, perhaps we should just let it come, that we might then sidetrack into resolving paradoxes, when perhaps paradoxes are part of life. It's a bit like awakened consciousness and being unconscious, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What do people think about that?
Trying to unmute myself with the space bar. You were holding that silence very well there, Ken. I think, yeah, I have a low threshold to staying silent, so I will say something that's completely ridiculous, probably. But no, I quite like that. I found myself thinking about, well, you know, in our little comments, what are the paradoxes that we're hitting? Gosh, they're everywhere and nowhere. They're in everything we do. There's an ambivalence, you know, I want to do this, but my value is to do that, but I end up not doing it. Does that fit with who I am? And then we seem to hit these contradictions all the time. So I think actually, Lip, it does sound, maybe there is something around not being overburdened by them. We were looking at systems outside of our control or outside of where we exist, things like values of what organizations do, for things like we both sort of reflecting on training versus coaching, and that being almost a contradiction in an organization, that there's an investment in the individual, but actually there isn't an investment in the individual. There's an investment in a cohort and then nothing more. That seems a bit of a contradiction. What if all training budgets were converted to coaching budgets and you really focused on the individual and their personal development? That is just one that came up. Sorry, I'm throwing in my 2 cents, and I'm now not going to speak and let other people come up when you leave the space.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Joel. That's great. Thank you. Let's just widen it out a bit more broadly again. Then, what was coming up for people in the conversations? Doesn't have to follow on from what was just being talked about. Just anything that was coming up. Jacqueline, was that you?
Yeah, it was. Sorry.
Jump in, Jacqueline.
Yeah, in our conversations, we were talking about the fact that you were mentioning I'm a coach, but I'm not really telling anybody. That sort of contradiction, and where it took us to was back. We both were in the previous workshop about shadow work. And we done an exercise where, we looked at our friends or systems and we identified what we liked and what we didn't like. And in terms of the paradoxical contradiction we were talking about, we could see links between, the things in our shadows that would probably cancel out the contradiction. If we were to take, for example, so my shadow positive was in a friend of mine, I like her boldness. But equally in another friend, the negative shadow was every time I asked her, we had a conversation, we would meet. Her world was always well, and I just felt a lack of transparency there. But if we were to take those two dynamics in regards to, being bold about telling people I'm a coach and it's going to be well when you do that, that's what we got to in our conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jacqueline. What else? Tom again, and then Alison.
Does Alison want to go first? I've already spoken.
Yeah, Alison, let's have you first, and then Tom.
Okay, so my thought, well, one of the things I was sharing was the fact that I've just rebranded, launched my new website, increased my prices, coincided that with a cost of living crisis. And it's sort of like thinking about the fact that, coaching is probably something that can help people navigate these storms and come out stronger at the end of it and be a really positive thing for them to do. But paradoxically, they won't be thinking of investing in coaching because they'll be thinking about paying the gas bill. And so at the time when they need the extra support and finding ways and options and solutions to things and new ways of being, that will be the time when they back away from it, because they'll see it as, you know, a nice to have rather than a necessity.
Interesting. And is that something that you experience as a belief or a truth?
I have had had a discovery call, and they said because of the cost of living crisis, they were now not, having said that they were definitely going to go ahead with it, felt that they couldn't because they were too worried about where their money was going to go. And they had that uncertainty in their financial situation. So yeah, so that it was a direct experience that I've had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much, Alison. Tom?
Yeah, and just another space where I've seen it crop up quite a few times is in limiting beliefs. That quite often someone will come to coaching with something that you eventually dig into and realize there's a limiting belief there, and they understand that actually the impact of that is not what they want, and they're behaving in a way that they're not necessarily wanting it, or it's not serving them well, and yet perversely they find themselves searching for evidence to prove that they're right to believe it. And you know, that's just another contradiction that I've seen quite a fair bit. And when you sort of dig into it a little bit more, you may end up finding that there's some sort of secondary gain from believing it, which is then stopping them from moving forwards and keeps them in that belief of that limiting of that thing that's limiting them, despite them realizing that it's not helping. So it's that constant sort of back and forth and internal struggle, which, you know, often they won't necessarily realize until they start looking at it and then examining it with a coach. So that's just one that I've seen quite often.
Nice. Great. Thank you, Tom. I'm curious to come back to Lip's question. I think it was around, you know, if we're doing too much to chase around paradoxes and trying to see them everywhere and trying to see contradictions everywhere. It sounded, Lip, like you were saying there was two potentials there. One is we kind of, you know, we spend a lot of time doing that, but also that we might end up looking to kind of solutionize a lot of these contradictions that are perhaps not solutionable. Did I capture that right?
Very good, Ken. Well summarized. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, I just wrote something down when you spoke, which was when does my curiosity become solutionizing? And for, you know, for me, there's something in there just to kind of, which is why I was talking about being curious at the beginning of all of this, rather than and holding this without attachment and holding this in a curious way, because as somebody else was saying earlier, we may not, what we experience as paradox may not be paradoxical to somebody else, because there is a, you know, there's a perception part to this as well, isn't there? But if we can, or if it's something that we feel like we would like to be curious about, and we offer it in a sort of unattached way, it may produce some other data, it may produce something, it may produce some other bits of information that can be helpful. So for me, certainly it was about that bridge between curiosity and not sliding too much into solutionizing. Yeah, Natasha, jump in.
Yeah, I was just thinking it can also help us to maybe not, you know, be too binary in our thinking, sort of embrace that, you know, something can exist with its opposite. I can't remember who said it before, this and that, rather than this or that.
Yes.
Whether it's for ourselves or for our clients.
Absolutely. 100%. Darren.
Hey Ken, hi everybody. One of my favorites in the world of coaching is around not to lead the client. And then we're taught in our training to ask the question at the beginning, what would be the best outcome for the meeting? And then we spend the rest of the meeting working with the client towards the preordained outcome, which I find quite amusing.
Yeah. Yes. No, I hear you. I know, which is which is why I think these things are about, because being aware of them and how we sit with them. That kind of moves me on to the second breakout, actually, which is much more about, how do we, I've put the questions in the chat box. It's about what might be the benefits of embracing contradiction and paradox, and how can we do that? What might be the benefits of embracing contradiction and paradox, and how can we do that? And again, thinking about yourself as a coach, thinking about your clients, and in the systems that we've been talking about, what actually might be the benefits of that? And I suppose in a way we could add in Natasha's last point about how do we also kind of make sure that we're not too binary about this as well. Okay, so we'll go into another group, another 10 minutes in a group in pairs again. You probably won't be in the same pairs again, but let's have a discussion about those questions. And then we'll come back and do some more sharing in the space. Is that all right with everybody? Everybody okay with that? Nodding heads, great. Krish, are we okay on the breakout rooms? 10 minutes, and we'll come back and have some more discussion in the group. Okay, welcome back. You know what I'm going to say now? I would love to hear what happened, what answers you came up with, or even what you were curious about or you were reflecting on. We'd like to offer some thoughts. Great, Natalie, and then Jim.
It was a really interesting conversation we had, and we were talking about how really a paradox will give you an opportunity to explore things, and we were talking about the word but, like and but, and how that can make such a big difference, and how paradoxes hold two things. And when you hold two things, there's often that notion of saying yes this but also this, and how saying yes this and this changes the idea of all of it. And we're even talking about one of the pictures that come up in the beginning when you show the man with a sign, don't put your feet up, and he had his feet up, rather than saying but he had his feet up. Really changes how you feel about a paradox, about how sometimes it's okay and possible to hold both sides, and that this is something to explore.
Nice, lovely. Thank you, Natalie. Jim?
Yeah, we had a good session chatting about that it gives us a different perspective, it gives us a different lens, and then it helps us find the truth. And I said it's like a truth seeker, and it helps you kind of come into equilibrium, kind of balance as to where is the truth in all of this. And that can be very powerful when you get those opposites coming together, that meeting in the middle, where you get that epiphany, you get that sort of realization that you're completely out of alignment, let's say. And I guess as coaches, we're more comfortable with that and exploring that and being in that world. But when you're working, I guess, with clients, that sudden realization, or that becoming aware of something that's in contradiction or out of alignment with what they feel is like a huge destabilization, but potentially of their world. And how do we hold that? So we were talking about that, but also we were talking about how we see it as a maybe a negative of that experience of contradiction in your life, but actually this can be seen as a very positive thing in terms of that seeking the truth.
Great. Thank you, Jim. Christos?
Yeah, one of the points we discussed was that in many situations that coaches, clients can bring, there is some contradiction, there is a paradox, and this is probably where the the challenge might be, and what we discussed about, and maybe we thought, is that if through reflection, if someone becomes aware and realizes that it's okay to hold both sides, and especially if we're talking about a choice or a decision, sometimes the awareness of both, let's say, options being true can paradoxically help the client make a decision. So we found that there is a benefit in acknowledging, recognizing, and then accepting.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Christos. Who else would like to share? Nikki, jump in. Nikki?
Sorry, it's the old forget to unmute yourself.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to carry on from Christos' point about the idea that maybe the playfulness with paradox sits in that space of what is comfortable and acceptable or unacceptable about the paradox, because we all carry contradiction and a sense of sort of contrary nature, and most of the time we feel okay about that, but occasionally there are things that just we find uncomfortable to accept or just won't sit together as bedfellows. And actually maybe it is the exploration of what is it about that paradoxical concept, idea, relationship, experience that feels uncomfortable, whereas other ones don't.
Yeah, I'm interested in what you said at the beginning there, Nikki, and I hope I'm not putting too much on this, but you used the word play and playing. Was there something in your mind about that idea as part of this too?
I think that the idea of contradiction I find fascinating, because I think it shows up all over the place, and it's something that it's a little bit like as you said at the beginning about red cars, and I feel that I've now been cursed because I feel like I see it all over the place, and particularly in coaching my clients, and it's about, I think for me, exploring that, because I think a lot of clients don't necessarily see it, and as a coach we're very privileged to be able to be in a position where we can truly listen and hear what is being said, and then offer some observations or things that we've kind of interpreted, and I think it is that playfulness with the client as to, I don't know, what do you think? Do you think this is a paradox? Do you think this is a contradiction? Is it a contradiction you're comfortable with? How do these things relate to each other? And because sometimes, clients tell me things and I think, God, how on earth do you balance those two things? Because they seem like they're in direct contradiction. But because they've come from, I don't know, conditioning or family scripts or, cultural beliefs, they're ideas or concepts that have been mashed or melded into a way where the client is, I know they seem contradictory, but it's fine, it works for me. And I think it's that playfulness. It's about exploring, okay, why is that okay? And why is this not okay?
Right. So I mean, I've just written down a few things here about exploration, playfulness, lightly wasn't the word you used, but I was feeling that, kind of holding these things lightly. And back to kind of Lip's original question about how do I stop getting confused? It sounds like you're in a space, Nikki, where it's kind of, well, let's explore this, let's play with it, let's be curious about it and see where that goes.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. Michelle.
Yeah, I was just about to say that we felt it was absolutely a place of curiosity, and that it was an opportunity to explore. It doesn't matter so much what the paradox or the contradiction was about, but just the fact that there was one, and that's the place to explore, and whether there is an awareness of that contradiction within the client, because sometimes it may be something that they were not aware of at the time. So actually having the chance to explore that, and the fact that it exists at all, is just the place to go.
Right. I'm wondering if there were any discussions around the systems part of this as well, around what might be the client system, or indeed if you've got any experience of working with a client or clients plural, where the systems that they were in had some sort of contradiction to them. Has anyone had any experience of that? We talked briefly about a kind of corporate organization whose values are supposed to be a certain way, but in reality they're not actually what's going on in the workplace. Michelle, is that your hand still up?
That's me up again.
Yeah, great.
Yes,
No, go for it.
I've got some experience of that, and that was something we touched on as well, was the values of the system. I work in a corporate environment mainly, so the values of the system can sometimes not be followed through, and that there is a hesitancy in the client because of the pressure from the system, or the expectations of the system to conform to that, and not be free to actually explore what's really going on for them.
Great. Thank you. A thumbs up from Christos. Thank you. Desi, let's come to you.
I actually have experience with clients who are so in tune with their own values, and they recognize that they might not be even that welcome in the society or in the corporate culture they are in, and they find themselves quite conflicted and quite emotional, how they can stay in tune with who they truly are, and practice. They come from a place of their own values within the boundaries of the corporation they work for.
And how have you explored that as the coach, Desi? How did that play out for you?
Well, my intuitive reaction is, or how to say, way to approach it is to hold the space for them, to allow all the feelings that they feel to come on the surface, so that they can hold everything at one space, and for them just to emerge, to have it's not even the solution, but their confidence in how to handle it, to emerge naturally. And what I tried last time was to introduce playfulness, because we more often than not, we get so stuck in our own perception and struggles. And I offered to zoom out, and I even had an idea of bringing up a poem and using that metaphor for them to just see how their whole life is, how they show up in all their life, instead of how they show up and they want to show up in the corporate world.
Right. Great. Thank you, Desi. I'm conscious.
Do you have any thoughts or suggestions?
Yeah, I mean, what I was writing down here, and this was a mixture, I guess, of my thoughts and my experience that I was talking about at the beginning, and what seems to have been coming up, because what seems to have been coming up is this theme of of curiosity and staying unattached and staying curious about what's going on for the client. It's about playfulness. That's a word, Desi, that you used and Nikki used as well. And about breaking the binary, moving from this word but into more of an and also about just checking in how we perceive something versus how a client might perceive it as well. All of these things seem like themes that have come out from what people have been saying. So that there's something kind of, you know, a lighter touch about some of this that perhaps allows the space, as you've been talking about, Desi, that allows the space in which someone can think about these things for themselves in a way perhaps that they hadn't either seen it before or, you know, hadn't felt it in the same way. So, you know, as ever, much of this stuff is about curiosity and staying unattached, but using these different contradictions and paradoxes as a way of further exploration. Okay, I need, so why this workshop has gone by incredibly quickly, I need to allow you to get to the main stage, but just before I do that, is there any last words or anything anybody would like to offer so that I don't leave anything unsaid in the space? No, Ken, we'd like our break. Okay, so Yannick, I think, is on the main stage finally. I think he's at 4:50. Thank you so much. This has been incredibly fun for me. I hope it's been fun for you too. Thank you so much for your participation. And yeah, let's keep our radars up for paradox and contradiction, but as ever, hold everything lightly and client-centered. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you, Kim. Brilliant.